Hello everybody and welcome to week number 10 of the college football season here in 2017 and my predictions. We are coming off of a week where we picked 6 games and I am proud to report that I was 6-0 in those games as far as who would win, which is pretty good considering one of them is always an upset. But anyway, against the spread, not so good. We were 2-3 against the spread, but we'll get into that as we look back on last week. And the first game of last week was number 11 Oklahoma State on the road against number 22 West Virginia. Oklahoma State was a 7.5 point favorite. I picked them to win, but I picked West Virginia to cover that 7.5, which they do not, as they fall 50-39. They end up losing by 11 points to the Cowboys. Oklahoma State outgained the Mountaineers 462-347. West Virginia turned it over 5 times, which sounds crazy, but Oklahoma State also turned it over 4, so 9 turnovers in this game. Not very pretty. There was 3 fumbles for Oklahoma State and an interception, 1 fumble for West Virginia, and 4 interceptions. Oklahoma State jumped out to a quick 13-0 lead, and by the end of the half, it was 23-10 Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State adds on a touchdown early in the third, which puts them up 30-10. West Virginia answers with 14 straight points to go down 30-24 at the end of the third. But Oklahoma State puts it away with 2 touchdowns, and each team exchanges a touchdown, and then West Virginia gets a garbage time one, which brings you the final score 50-39. So we got this pick incorrect. Well, we got the pick correct, but we got the spread incorrect, rather. Which brings us to the next game. It was our lock of the week. It was Michigan at home against Rutgers. Michigan was a 23.5 point favorite. I said that was a lock. And they didn't cover. They ended up winning by 21 points. They really should have covered, though. They had a field goal opportunity. Let's see. Let me find the number here for you. Okay, so about halfway through the third quarter, Michigan misses a 37-yard field goal. Quinn Nordine has been very good this year, so that's definitely a field goal he should make, and had he made that, boom, spread's covered. But Michigan ends up winning 35-14. It was actually only a 7-7 game. It was a 0-0 game after the first quarter, and until 2:49 to go in the second quarter, it was 7-7. Michigan ends up with 2 touchdowns at the end of this half to go up 21-7 at the halftime once they put in redshirt freshman quarterback Brandon Peters. They end up tacking on another touchdown in the third. Rutgers gets a touchdown in return, and then Michigan gets another one in the fourth for that 35-14 final. They also should have covered the spread later in the game. Last few minutes of the game, Brandon Peters underthrew a wide open receiver at about the 10-yard line who would have walked into the end zone. So even though the score doesn't reflect it, Michigan put in their their redshirt freshman quarterback and just looked a lot better. And overall, in terms of the team stats, Michigan outgains Rutgers 471-195. They had 36 minutes of possession to Rutgers 23. They had 25 first downs to the Rutgers 9. So it was complete domination by Michigan. Rutgers had a big play from Janarian Grant to score a touchdown, and then they just put together a nice drive for another one. So hats off to them. They're obviously a much better team than last year, but still not a very good team. Michigan had the only turnover of the day. It was an interception from John O'Korn before he got benched. And like I said, Brandon Peters came in with about 7 minutes left in the second, and Michigan immediately scores 3 straight touchdowns. Brandon Peters goes 10 for 14, 124 yards and a touchdown. We'll see what he can do this week against Minnesota with his first start. Probably not going to be very good weather, so that will be interesting. Anyway, we got the pick right, but we got the spread wrong. Which brings us to number 2 Penn State on the road against number 6 Ohio State. I told you guys that this game would probably come down to the last few moments, and it did. Penn State choked also. I picked Ohio State to win. They were a 6.5 point favorite, which I thought was ridiculous, so I picked them to win, but I did not pick them to cover, which they do not. They end up winning by 1 point, 39-38. Penn State was actually in the lead at 1 point, 21-3, early in the second quarter. They go into the halftime with a 28-17 lead, and at the end of the third quarter, it's 35-20 Penn State. Looks like they would win pretty convincingly on the road against Ohio State. But Ohio State gets a touchdown with 11 minutes to go in the game, which puts them down 35-27. Penn State adds on a field goal with under 6 minutes to go back up 11. And in 1 minute and 22 seconds, Ohio State drives 76 yards after that field goal to trim the lead to 38-33. They end up getting the ball back, and then they go 58 yards in a minute and 19 seconds to take the lead, 39-38. Penn State gets the ball, and they promptly go 4 and out. And that would end the game. So Ohio State gets the win. Big comeback in a pretty good game. A lot of people look at games, how they end, and automatically say, oh, wow, what a great game. This really wasn't a great game. It was mostly just a tale of two halves. The first half was pretty much all Penn State, and the fourth quarter really was pretty much all Ohio State. So a great finish and a pretty well-played game. It wasn't great in the aspect where it was back and forth and each team dished it out evenly. In the stats sheet, Ohio State actually dominated, 529 yards to Penn State's 283, but they had the 2 turnovers off of fumbles, and Penn State was a lot more efficient on their early offensive drives, but Ohio State clamps down in the second half, and especially the fourth quarter, and are able to come back and pull it off. So we got the pick right, and we got the spread right. Which brings us to Georgia, number 3, on the road against Florida. I said Georgia would win, but I just didn't trust them to cover the spread. But I think this was Georgia's last real test until they face Alabama in the SEC championship game. And they passed it easily. They win 42-7. So I believe in Georgia now. I'm not going to doubt them anymore. I think they have turned the corner. No more choke jobs for them. Well, not yet. So I had Georgia winning, which they do easily. I did not have them covering the 14-point spread, which they do easily. 42-7 was the final. They outgained Florida 393-249. Florida had 2 turnovers, though, 2. Georgia's 1, and Florida's offense just was not able to have sustained drives. It was a 21-0 game at the end of the first quarter. It was 42-0 until 2:42 to go in the game when Florida gets a garbage time touchdown. So pick right, spread wrong. Which brings us to our upset of the week from last week. I told you number 25, Iowa State, was going to win against number 4, TCU, who was a 6.5-point favorite in Ames, Iowa. And they do. They win 14-7. They are actually outgained by TCU 307-255, but TCU turns it over 3 times. Iowa State only once. Iowa State was actually up 14-0 at the half. And this game was just all defense, believe it or not, for a Big 12 conference game. Only 2 offensive touchdowns all game, both of them Iowa State's. TCU's only score of the game came on the opening kickoff of the second half. That made it 14-7, and that's all that happened for TCU. So Iowa State, great game, great season for them so far. Don't know how they lost to Iowa at home. I picked them to win that game, and they should have. Anyway, we got that pick right, so we got our upset of the week right. So then finally that brings us to our final game from last week. It was number 14 NC State on the road against number 9 Notre Dame. I said, all right, I admit Notre Dame's pretty good. They're going to win at home. But I picked NC State to cover the 7-point spread just because I figured it'd be a pretty even game, but it wasn't. Notre Dame wins 35-14. They outgain NC State 422-263. This game was pretty much all Notre Dame, although it was 14-7 NC State early in the second quarter. But Notre Dame ties it up immediately at 14-14 and then just ran away with it the rest of the way. They tack on another before the end of the half to go up 21-14 and then score 2 touchdowns, which gave us our final score of the day. So after last week, as I mentioned, we were 6-0 overall in the straight-up picks, 2-3 overall against the spread. So our current total after 9 weeks of college football is 50-21 overall straight up, 34-37 overall against the spread. Got to work on that. 3-5 in upsets and 5-4 in locks. So they have not been locks. But as always, another week to try and improve. And what a week we have coming up here in week number 10. I have 10 games for you this week. First time in a long time we've had more than like 5 or 6. And of these 10 games, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of them are top 25 matchups. So we have a fantastic week of college football coming up. And the first game on the schedule is a Big Ten matchup. It is number 7 Penn State on the road as a 9-point favorite against number 24 Michigan State. Michigan State coming off of a triple overtime loss on the road against Northwestern. Penn State obviously coming off that loss we just discussed earlier. You guys know if you listen every week, I'm a Michigan fan. So I don't think it's just my natural disdain for the Spartans that makes me think that they're just not a good team. I don't know why they're ranked. They barely beat Iowa at home. Iowa's not a good team, especially on the road. They only beat Michigan by 4 points when Michigan turned the ball over 5 times to nothing. And you only beat them by 4? Are you kidding me? They go on the road against Minnesota. They only win by 3. To be fair, they had a bigger lead. Minnesota kind of came back late. But still, Minnesota's not good at all. They only win by 3 there. They win against Indiana at home by 8. But that game is a lot closer than it looked. Indiana actually had the lead for the majority of the game. And then they go on the road against Northwestern and lose in triple overtime. And it really should not have gone to overtime. Northwestern kind of choked down the stretch. And the one good team they played this year, Notre Dame, they got the doors completely blown off them at home. Then you got Penn State, who's dominated everybody they played except for Ohio State on the road, and they only lose by 1. And they had a big lead early. So, I don't know. Please, somebody, if you're listening, who's not a Michigan State fan or has no horse in the race in the Big Ten at all, that would be even better. Do you think Michigan State's any good? Do you think they're really a top 25 team in the country? Because I don't buy it at all. Anyway, they're at home against Penn State. Penn State's a 9-point favorite. Penn State's going to win easily. The only problem is there's going to be crappy weather this weekend in this area. So, weather is always a great equalizer. So, I think Penn State would cover the 9 points easily if the weather was fine. But with this weather, this game could be a lot closer and a lot less offensively pleasing, which isn't a good thing for Penn State. But they should still be able to take care of business against Michigan State. I think weather aside, they're going to win anyway. The only question for me is the 9-point spread in the weather. It's supposed to be cold and rainy. But I'm going to take Penn State on the road to beat Michigan State and cover the 9-point spread. Then the next game is a Big 12 matchup. It's probably the worst game I've ever predicted so far this year. The only reason it's on here is because I needed an upset of the week, and I just could not find any that were pleasing. The one I thought of was Texas and TCU, but I don't believe in that strongly enough to go with Texas to beat TCU on the road. If it was in Texas, I probably would have picked it, but it's not. So I had to go somewhere else, also in the Big 12, to find my upset of the week. It is Baylor on the road against Kansas. Yeah, these teams have played 16 games and have 1 win between them. They are both 0-5 in the Big 12. Something's got to give here. So you're thinking, okay, well, Kansas is probably the favorite. You're picking Baylor to get their first win of the season, right? No, get this. Baylor on the road, 0-8, is a 7.5-point favorite against Kansas. Now, I know Kansas is awful, and this truly is the battle of the basement in the Big 12. But a 7.5 road favorite for Baylor? I don't know about that. I don't think there's any doubt they don't cover that spread. They might win. Kansas is just terrible. But Kansas put up a fight last week against Kansas State. They only lost by 10. And Baylor hasn't put up a fight since their game against Oklahoma last month, over a month ago. So give me Kansas at home to beat Baylor as my upset of the week because they're a 7.5-point favorite somehow. Yeah, who cares? But like I said, I had to go find an upset somewhere, so I went and got that one. So back to games that actually matter. Number 4, Clemson, is on the road as a 7.5-point favorite against number 20, NC State. NC State coming off that loss against Notre Dame we talked about. They're back home. They've been pretty good, but not very good. They've squeaked out most of their wins. Clemson coming off of a 14-point home win against Georgia Tech, which was preceded by that ugly loss on the road against Syracuse. I think they're going to go into NC State, and I think they'll be ready to play. They're 7.5-point favorite. I think they're going to try and get their mojo back that they lost 2 weeks ago, and I think they have a platform to prove it on the road against a top 20 team. They're going to go in there, and they're going to beat NC State, and they will cover that 7.5-point spread. Then we go back to the Big Ten. It is number 6, Ohio State, on the road against Iowa. Ohio State, obviously, coming off that game against Penn State. Iowa coming off of a 10-point win at home against Minnesota. Iowa is not very good. Ohio State is a 17.5-point favorite on the road in this game. Now, I said it earlier in the year when Iowa hosted Penn State. Strange things happen at Kinnick Stadium, typically at night. Iowa at home during the day, for some reason it's like a completely different team. But they are at home. It's not a night game, but I do think they rise up to the occasion a little bit. Not nearly as much as they did against Penn State, which I predicted, by the way. I said that game would probably come down to the wire. This game's not going to come down to the wire, but I do think Iowa keeps it to less than 17 points, or 17 or less. Either way, the spread's 17.5. So give me Ohio State to win. Give me Iowa to cover. Speaking of Iowa, we go back to the Big 12. We got number 15 Iowa State on the road against West Virginia. West Virginia is actually favored in this game by 2.5 points. And I like that because I was going to pick West Virginia anyway. I think Iowa State's been pretty good, but they're not a Big 12 contender. I just don't buy it. It's Iowa State, and they're going to prove that they're Iowa State. West Virginia's been all right. They've lost some tough games, and they've won a couple of tough games. So I think West Virginia at home will be able to take care of business against Iowa State. So give me West Virginia to win, and give me West Virginia to cover the 2.5-point spread. Then we go out west for the Pac-12. We got number 21 Stanford on the road against number 25 Washington State. Washington State is a 2-point favorite, coming off of an embarrassing loss on the road against Arizona where they lose 58-37. Stanford coming off of a 1-point win on the road against Oregon State, which is nothing to be proud of. In fact, that is embarrassing. Oregon State really should have won that game. I was watching that. Anyway, this one's tough because Stanford has been up and down. They've lost to teams they really shouldn't have, but so has Washington State. And both of Washington State's losses were on the road against teams they had no business losing to, and they lost badly. They are at home. And this game is totally 50-50 for me. So I can see Stanford going in and roughing up Washington State. This is, a typical game where Washington State might just roll over. But it also would have surprised me to see Washington State bounce back after loss and kind of beat down Stanford. So I'm just going with what's most likely to happen in these teams' resumes from this season and seasons past, mostly. So I'm going to go with Stanford to go into Washington State and win on the road. Probably a close game. Wouldn't surprise me if it isn't, though, because Washington State loses ugly. So Washington State loses as a 2-point favorite at home to Stanford. Then we go back to the Big 12, specifically Oklahoma. It is the Battle of Bedlam. It is Oklahoma number 5 on the road against number 11 Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State's a 2.5-point favorite. Oklahoma State coming off of that win on the road against West Virginia. That was preceded by a close game on the road against Texas where they snuck out in overtime. Oklahoma coming off of a big win against Texas Tech. So I don't know. This game is totally 50-50. Even looking at ESPN's matchup predictor, it has 50.4% Oklahoma, 49.6% Oklahoma State. And I totally agree with that. So this one, I'm just going with instinct. Because looking at it on paper, like I said, it's just a coin toss, which usually I would lean towards the home team. I just think Oklahoma comes in and plays a really good game, and I think Oklahoma sneaks out in a close one. So I'm going to take Oklahoma on the road as a 2.5-point favorite to get it done over Oklahoma State. And now to the SEC, we got number 19 LSU on the road against number 2 Alabama. LSU has found its way back into the top 25. They have won 3 in a row, including a pretty impressive win on the road against Mississippi, where they put up 40 points, ended up winning 40-24. Alabama obviously has been rolling all season. There was no difference at home against Tennessee. But I will say this, Alabama hasn't played anybody, and that is including Florida State. So I think LSU is going to come into Alabama, and I think LSU is going to be ready to play. Now, Alabama's a 21.5-point favorite. But I don't think Alabama's played a defense nearly as good as LSU, and I think this game is going to be boring. So if you want some help falling asleep, probably turn this game on. It might be a good one for you. So I think Alabama's probably going to dominate the game mostly, but I think LSU's defense will be good enough to hold them in check a bit. And I would say that this game's going to be about 17-3 Alabama at halftime, something like that. And then by the end of the third quarter, it's 20-13 3 Alabama. And the final score of this game is probably 23-3 Alabama or 27-6 Alabama, something like that. So it's going to be boring. It's going to be low scoring. So give me Alabama to win, but give me LSU to cover that 21.5 point spread. I just think that's too big for this LSU defense when Alabama hasn't played a defense really all year, other than Florida State. Florida State is a pretty good defense, but they only put up 24. So then we have our second to last game of the week. It is number 13 Virginia Tech on the road against number 10 Miami. Back in the ACC we are. Miami is the underdog at home, and rightfully so. They are a 2.5 point underdog. They snuck out with a win on the road against Florida State 4 weeks ago. Then they snuck out with a 1 point win against Georgia Tech 3 weeks ago. They beat Syracuse by 8 2 weeks ago, and then on the road against North Carolina, who are awful, they sneak out with another win by 5. So Miami's just skating by. There's a reason they're only number 10 when they're 7-0, and why they're underdogs at home to Virginia Tech, who's coming off of back-to-back big wins against UNC and Duke. I think this one's pretty easy for me, even at home. Give me Virginia Tech as the 2.5 point favorite to win and cover against Miami. And finally, our last game of the week. It is another Pac-12 match, another top 25 match. It is number 22 Arizona against number 17 USC. USC's at home, and they are a 7.5 point favorite. This is my lock of the week. I don't know. I don't buy into Arizona at all. Yeah, they had a big win at home against Washington State. Other than that, they haven't been too impressive. And they've lost 2 games already. One to Utah at home and one to Houston at home. So I'm not buying into Arizona being a good team. On the road against USC. USC is going to beat them. USC is going to cover that 7.5. That's my lock of the week. And that's my final prediction of the week. Thank you everybody for watching. As always, be sure to comment below with your thoughts on any of my predictions or any of your predictions, whether any of these 10 games or any game. If you want to tell me what you think will happen in the Wake Forest Notre Dame game or South Florida Connecticut game, I don't care. Throw it in the comments. I'll give you my opinion as well. And as always, be sure that you are subscribed for next week where we break down all 10 of these games and I grab some other ones to predict. Pretty sure it's another good week next week. I haven't really looked. But just off the top of my head, knowing some of the games that are coming up, I think it's going to be another pretty loaded schedule. So, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you all next week. Goodbye.